Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you part 3 of my section by section bookshelf tour. I did the first 2 parts looking at my Canadian literature collection and my general fiction collection quite a while ago now. There's a vlog coming out where I talk about being reunited with these bookshelves and being able to access these books and continue with the tour. So I am taking inspiration from Lena Norms, who organizes her books by rainbow. And she did a rainbow bookshelf tour. I really liked that idea of breaking the bookshelf down into smaller pieces to spotlight books that you maybe don't have a chance to. I'm going to walk you through the books in my Arts and Letters and Indigenous Literature collection, my graphic novel collection, and my folk and fairy story collection. Full disclosure, this is the second time I'm filming this. The first time the footage is unusable. So the first section I have here is Arts and Letters. So this is poetry and plays, basically. The Girl Aquarium by Jen Campbell, Short Talks by Anne Carson, Pale as Real Ladies, Poems for Pauline Johnson by Joan Cait, Final Harvest by Emily Dickinson, From the Medley by Peggy Dragisic, Trilogy by H.D., The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur, Seed Catalogue by Robert Kurech, Doom Rolled in Glitter by Lena Norms, The Wolf is Back by Robert Priest, illustrated by Joan Krigsman, Adult Language Warning by William Robertson, Stevenson by Daphne Marlett and Robert Minden, Spring Awakening, Book and Lyrics by Stephen Sater, music by Duncan Shaik. This is one of the books that I chose to talk about. The Collected Works of Billy the Kid by Michael Ondaatje, Standing All Through the Night, Poems by Audrey Petkertisen, Even This Page is White, and I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shreya, Beowulf, translated by Seamus Heaney. We sort of get into my Shakespeare collection here. Some of these are from high school. This is one of them, Hamlet. I have these Coles notes that are my mom's, actually. Everything on this shelf is read except for these, because it didn't make sense to me to keep them with my unread books, and it doesn't make sense to me to read them without reading the plays. So as I read the plays, I will come back to these. King Lear, As You Like It, and Much Ado About Nothing. Othello, Norton Critical Edition, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the Coles notes, The Winter's Tale, and then Macbeth, The Merchant of Venice, and The Tempest in these No Fear Shakespeare versions. These were all plays that I studied in high school. The Tempest, this is the one that I studied in university, and then Sophocles, Antigone. Then we get into a small Indigenous literature section. I honestly can't remember why I separated this out at some point, but I did, and it just felt easier to keep it this way rather than putting it back, and this way I can sort of see all of these things that I have together. This is really a mix of all the things. Taktumi, an anthology of Arctic horror stories, Half-Breed by Maria Campbell, The Marrow Thieves, which is a book that I chose to talk about, and Empire of Wild, both by Sherry DeMoline, All My Relations, an anthology of contemporary Canadian native fiction, edited by Thomas King, Housemaid of Dawn by N. Scott Momaday, Monkey Beach, Son of a Trickster, Trickster Drift, Return of the Trickster, all by Eden Robinson. Oh, I don't think Sheila Watson is Indigenous. I think this is Canlit that was just shoved inside another book. I own The Double Hook by Sheila Watson, and it belongs on another shelf. Here we have Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko, Godless But Loyal to Heaven, The Lesser Blessed, and Night Moves by Richard Van Camp, Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead, which I read last year and talked about. I loved this. And Just Pretending by Lisa Bird Wilson. Then down here I have my graphic novels. This is another subsection that is a little bit higgledy-piggledy. Lady Castle by Dawson Woods, Farrow, and Nolte. Monstrous Volume 1 by Marjorie Liu and Sonia Takeda. Novana of the Northern Lights. The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina by Roberto Aguirre Sacasa and Robert Hack. The Lolo Woods by Carmen Maria Machado. Danny and Tamara Bonvillain Saga, Volumes 1 and 2 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. The Sandman, Volume 1, Preludes and Nocturnes by Neil Gaiman. The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl by Henderson and Renzi. North Henderson and Renzi? Yes. Quiet Girl in a Noisy World, an Introvert Story by Debbie Tung. Through the Woods by Emily Carroll, and I did pull this to talk about. Spell on Wheels by Cait Leth, Megan Levins, and Marissa Louise. Heartstopper Volumes 1 and 2 by Alice Oseman. I just finished watching the Netflix adaptation for this a second time. It is adorable. You should watch it if you want something warm and fuzzy. Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell and Faith Erin Hicks. Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. A Girl Called Echo Volume 1 by Katharina Vermette, Scott B. Henderson, and Donovan Yassiet. A Story About Cancer with a Happy Ending by India Desjardins and Marianne Ferrer, translated by Solong Ouliette. I have the Amulet series by Kazu Kibushi, volumes 1 through 8. The Witch Boy, Hidden Witch, The Midwinter Witch by Molly Knox Ostertag. These are very queer 9 to 12 graphic novels. I love these. The Girl from the Sea by Molly Knox Ostertag. Sheets and Delicates by Brenna Thumler. And then I tried manga at some point, and I have 3 of them. My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness by Nagata Kabi. 10 Count by Rihito Takari. And Your Name by Makoto Shinkai and Renmaro Koton. And then we move into a small fairy tale section that I put together specifically because I needed room on my shelf. So when I set these bookshelves up when we moved in, I left this little bit of space to shift the books. It turns out that there needed to be so much shifting everywhere that I thought it would be easier just to create a new small category and free up a little bit of space in a lot of sections. So this is a quick, dirty solution to a problem that will require bigger organization. White as Milk, Red as Blood, The Forgotten Fairy Tales of Franz Xavier von Schoenwerth. The Sister Who Ate Her Brothers and Other Gruesome Tales by Jen Campbell, illustrated by Adam D'Souza. Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda Leduc. This I did pull to talk about. Names for the Sea, Strangers in Iceland by Sarah Moss. This is another book that I chose to talk about. Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night by Jen Campbell. The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. The Virago Book of Witches by Shahrukh Hussain. Beyond the Pale by Emily Urquhart. Folk and Fairy Tales, edited by Martin Hallett and Barbara Karsak. This is a textbook from university. Gossip from the Forest, Tangled Roots of Our Forests and Fairy Tales by Sarah Maitland. Angela Carter's Book of Fairy Tales. Fierce Fairy Tales, Poems and Stories to Stir Your Soul by Nikita Gill. The Original Folk and Fairy Tales of the Brothers Grimm, translated and edited by Jack Sipes, illustrated by Andrea Desso. Alright, so now that we've gone through what is on those shelves, let's take a moment to talk about the text that I pulled. This is just an opportunity to spotlight these texts, to talk about my relationship to these texts. In the past, it hasn't always been books that I loved. I think this time, these are all books that I love. Let's talk about the first one here in this pile, Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson. So again, another piece of Indigenous literature, this time from the West Coast, from BC. It is looking at, if I remember correctly, the Indigenous group in this book are the Haisla people. This is about a woman named Lisa Marie who, her brother has been lost at sea. It's flipping back and forth between her childhood growing up as a young Indigenous woman, at the same time that it is about that waiting. You don't know if Jimmy is alive or dead. Eden Robinson has this way with words that is just gorgeous. She can give you like a sentence or two about a character and you can picture them so fully. You cannot go wrong with Eden Robinson. Then I have The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Demaline. This is a piece of Indigenous dystopian fiction. So one of the things that I feel like comes up a lot is that Indigenous folks are living in the dystopian now. The apocalyptic event was settler colonialism. Here we have a slight push into the dystopian future in which white people have lost the ability to dream and it's driving them bananas. They discovered that if they harvest the bone marrow of Indigenous peoples that they can dream again. And so Indigenous peoples are being hunted for their bone marrow, and this is about the flight and the coming together and the resistance of Indigenous folks. There is a sequel to it that I am very excited to read. It is on my TBR for this year, but if you missed the hype for this, for a while it was everywhere, especially when I was working at Indigo. It's highly awarded. It's definitely worth the read, and it is so good for adults and children alike. If you are a settler in North America, I feel like this is essential reading. The next book I have here I pulled because I just wanted to be nostalgic and selfish for a moment. So this is Spring Awakening. Pre-pandemic, my friend and I had just started a podcast called the Wild Sounds Civilized Podcast. It was looking at books and music and how we think about these things, how we analyze these things. And so she has a background in classical music and in teaching, and I have a background in children's literature and academia. Like, we both have very different educational experiences. I just want to be nostalgic because we just made the decision to let the website go. It has been over a year since either of us have put out an episode, and I had so much fun. I had so much fun with that podcast.
So the long story long is that you have Vendla, a young lady whose mom will not tell her where babies come from, and you have Melchior, a young man who happens to know where babies come from because he has read it in books, which I don't know how well that translates, and we will talk about that, but they have some other assorted teens, and they are all friends, they're all growing up. All of them are going through a sexual frustration. None of them actually know what it is, except for Melchior, who tells all his friends what it is in the form of an essay, which I love.
I wish we could see that essay.
I really, really desperately want friends that say, I don't understand this. Will you provide me with an essay? Because that's one of the things that I really miss in my life.
So I just want to shout out Spring Awakening and that podcast episode, and I will link it below because this was a moment in time for me that was delightful. It was an opportunity to do something different, to make a friend. I'm uploading the audio to YouTube as sort of a record for us, but this is one of our earlier episodes. It is looking at young people and sex. It is a musical, and it was just a fun time. So holding this up more to plug the podcast episode and like as a personal moment. Like, sometimes we have books that like I don't think I'll ever be able to get rid of this because of what it represents in my life as a reader, as an online creator. Like, I would be hard pressed to unhaul this because of everything creative that went into this. Then we're gonna move into, actually all of these sort of fit into fairy tales. So the first one that I want to spotlight is Through the Woods Stories by Emily Carroll. So this is obviously from my graphic novel collection. Something that I really struggle with graphic novels is I have to enjoy the graphic aspect of the graphic novel. Like, there are so many graphic novels that get praised and have such love, and I personally don't love realist graphic novels. I want sort of surreal, otherworldly, really bold color palettes. I feel like this is one of those books that I saw hyped on BookTube for ages. So many people, when I first joined the community, were raving about this. I only got to it recently, and I mean, I feel like this is one of the graphic novels that really demonstrated the potential of the genre, right? Like, there have been a handful of graphic novels. They're the ones that I own, really. The only way to say it is like delicious. They are a feast for your eyes. I just want to bring up, because I think it's worth the hype, it's like creepy short stories in graphic form. Then we have two pieces of nonfiction that fit in that folk and fairy tale section, and the first one is Disfigured by Amanda Leduc. She's Canadian. This is like a coming together of all of the things. This is one of my favorite small publishers in Toronto, Coach House Books. It is on disfigurement in fairy tales and folk stories. She is disabled and reflecting on how it feels to see yourself in like the villains always. So in many ways it's memoir, it's looking at fairy tales critically but gently. Like, it's not like an academic scholarly critique of fairy tales. it almost reads more like a memoir that uses fairy tale as a touchstone because we're all familiar with folk and fairy stories. This is so good. I highly recommend it. Then I have Names for the Sea by Sarah Moss. This is about a woman who moves to Iceland, I believe for just 1 year, experiences just a vastly different life. This book gives me wanderlust. It makes me wish I was the type of person who could get a contract job in Iceland for a year and work and live immersed somewhere very different. She talks a lot about the experience of being foreign, of the landscape, of the harshness of the environment, of the folk and fairy stories that sort of environment inspire. It was so unexpected. I want to go, and I feel like I want to reread this book now that I'm holding it up and I'm talking about it. Like, reading about how bleak Iceland was in 2009 in the height of the financial crisis, like the culture shock of her coming from the UK where like strawberries are imported all year round to Iceland. It was just so good. Do you ever find this, that when you love something so much, it's hard to talk about? Like, I could rant for years on a book that I hate. Literally, I could make like hours and hours of footage for books that I hate. And here's a book that I love that I struggle to find words for. You know what? I think I might actually just add it to the pile to reread. If you enjoyed this video, I will leave a link to the playlist for this bookshelf tour. Editing Emily, if there isn't a playlist for this, make one. We need to thank my patrons who make videos like this possible. I really appreciate the work that they enable me to do. If you are interested in becoming a patron, in having access to the exclusive Stephen King book club, the next book that we're reading in that book club is Firestarter. That's the book that we're reading in May. Links to the Patreon page are in the description box down below. Consider liking, consider subscribing. It helps the channel out. Let me know if you have read any of these books, if you love any of these books, if hearing me talk about these books set that little like flag in your brain that's like, oh, that's like that book. I feel like you'll like that book because you like this book. Share them down below. I would love that. I hope you're all doing well, that you are staying safe, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye.